It's a race to collect the codices. One symbiote wants to revive God himself, and the other wants to keep him resting. This is absolute carnage. Enter Carnage. After Carnage's latest interference in Eddie Brock's life, the man finds himself symbioteless, wanted for mass murder, and wandering the streets of New York alongside his son, who believes that Eddie is his older brother. In short, Eddie Brock's life has somehow managed to hit an all-time low. And thanks to some symbiote-worshipping cult resurrecting Carnage, it's only going to get worse as the Psycho is on a quest to awaken Null, the god of all symbiotes. There's only one direction for Eddie's life to go now, and it is down. While explaining this to his son on the bustling streets of New York, Eddie spots a strange man following them. Believing it to be Carnage or one of his cronies, he takes his son's hand and runs, going straight for the nearest subway station. Unfortunately for them, the strange figure was an ally and Carnage was the one waiting for the duo inside the station. Something they learn when the two find themselves pushed onto the train tracks. Luckily, Venom manages to catch up to them and protects both father and son. Quickly recognizing this familiar sensation, Eddie is able to derail the train and Venom is reborn. Although the two have got a lot to catch up on, it seems that all talk will have to wait as the Venom symbiote desperately tells Eddie that they need to move, and fast. The reason? Well, Carnage has arrived and is stronger than ever before. Despite the obvious power difference, Eddie rushes into battle, only for him to get thrown around and hammered on like a ragdoll. Carnage even taunts the man, saying that Eddie has always looked better in red, or in other words, covered in blood. Brock is only able to escape this pounding thanks to electrocuting both himself and Carnage with the train tracks. As Eddie limps away from the scene of the battle with his son, we get a glimpse of Carnage's host body, the madman Cletus Cassidy. But instead of a person under the suit, we see Cletus looking more like a walking corpse. It seems he wasn't properly brought back to life when the symbiote was revived. However, Cassidy's personality and pretty much his entire identity are still intact, having been absorbed by the Carnage symbiote. It's a dark fate, but it's hard to feel bad for the guy. I mean, he was a serial killer beforehand, and he chose to keep the symbiote, so he kinda did it to himself. Friends, allies, and enemies. Jumping back to our little trio, we see Dylan still supporting Eddie as they walk through some sort of back alley. After a long silence, Dylan finally asks his supposed brother where they're going. Instead of straight up answering, Eddie tells him that this was the bad idea he was talking about earlier. Enter Peter Parker. Before we get into Spidey's connection to this whole thing, be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on to never miss an upload, and smash that like button for some plot armor today. Meeting the webhead in a nearby coffee shop, Eddie fills him in on everything that's happened, to which Spidey says, "I hate symbiote stuff, just so much." A more than fair response. But before taking any action, Spider-Man has to know two very important things. Who's the kid and where'd Eddie get him from? Both of these concerns are answered with one simple sentence. "He's my kid, Pete." Although shocked, Peter gives Eddie an important piece of advice. Growing up not knowing your father, you need to tell him. Before Eddie can take this in, he spots something terrifying on the news. A mass grave has been discovered in New Jersey full of long-deceased persons, such as General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. Worst of all, the bodies found had their spines removed. Their spines! The place where the Codex, a tiny piece of DNA left behind in all symbiote users, resides. Carnage has gotten to them. Not even the dead are safe from his latest sick plan. This angers Eddie, as he believes Dylan's mother, Anne, could be among them due to her time as She-Venom. Dylan watches on in confusion as Eddie wipes away tears at the mention of her and Spidey goes quiet. But before Dylan can find out who exactly she is, they're interrupted again. This time by a bunch of would-be thieves who, safe to say, immediately regret trying to rob this shop. Leaving them to Spidey, Venom swings off to the least trustworthy but definitely most reliable genius he knows, the Maker. He's the Reed Richards of Earth 1610, who happens to find himself stuck on Earth 616. Seeking this version for advice, it turns out that the Maker had already predicted everything and was in the final stages of completing a machine to extract codices without killing the owner. Eddie definitely has his suspicions as to what Reed is up to, but he decides to drop them for now as Spider-Man has just arrived alongside his godson, Normie Osborn. Though annoyed that there are children in his lab, Maker allows them to introduce themselves to each other before he hastily approaches Normie, telling the child he will need to take some blood before placing him inside the machine. This is a major red flag for Spidey, as he doesn't know how exactly the machine works yet, or if it's even safe. Reluctantly, the scientist tells Spidey and Venom to get him someone else with a codex, perhaps a certain madman most likely to be Cassidy's next target. Spidey and Eddie realize with wide eyes who they're going to have to break out: the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn. He's currently held in the Ravencroft home for the criminally insane after his stint as the Carnage-empowered Red Goblin. Seeing as how the symbiote is essentially Cletus Cassidy immortalized, as a side effect of wearing it, Norman believes himself to be the serial killer Cassidy, adopting all of the Madman's personality, habits, and even characteristics. Thanks to John Jameson, the Man-Wolf, and his connections to Ravencroft, Venom and Spidey find themselves standing at Osborn's cell door. Suddenly, Peter's spider sense goes off as John begins to lose control of his body. Laughing hysterically and apologizing to Peter, the man starts up the emergency Blair system, attempting to use the high frequency to purge the piece of Carnage trying to take control of him. This ends up being useless when John falls to the floor, completely out of control, repeatedly saying, "God is coming." Meanwhile, Carnage slowly makes his way to them, infecting every inmate he comes across. Once Venom and Spidey finally have John Jameson tied up, they have a new problem to face: Carnage and his mini army rushing at them. Venom immediately suggests they escape, knowing they can't take on a battle of this size. But there's one issue: Norman Osborn. If they leave him here, the real Cletus will simply kill him and take his codex, becoming more powerful. With a heavy sigh, Peter says something he never thought he would: "We have to save Norman Osborn." Launching into battle, Spidey tries his best to hold them off, but he's quickly seized by the real Carnage, who insists on showing him a trick. Open sesame! Slamming Peter into Norman's steel cell door, breaking it right off the hinges. He then comes face to face with his oldest and most memorable rogue, the Green Goblin. And of course, he greets Peter with a knife and a swing. Knowing that they don't have time for this, Venom intervenes with a kick to Norman's face, shutting the maniac up. With all three of them locked in Norman's concrete cell and Carnage banging at the door, Spidey has no choice but to try his best to punch through 3-foot-thick concrete walls, and fail. At the same time, Venom single-handedly holds off Carnage and his insane cronies. Meanwhile, the man they came to sneak out is knocked out cold on the floor. It's not looking good for our heroes at all, as Carnage manages to break through Venom and get his reddish tendrils on Norman Osborn. A defeated Venom and Spidey watch on in horror as Carnage puppeteers his prey. Greeting him as the Little Carnage Prince, he gives him a piece of the symbiote. And with that, the second Carnage is reborn. Now facing off against two Carnages and an army of infested criminals, the duo makes a very easy tactical decision. It's time to retreat. Before they make their escape, Peter jumps into the crowd of symbiotes in an attempt to save Osborn. That accursed hero mentality. Luckily, Eddie doesn't have that, pulling Spidey back and flying out the concrete wall he just broke a hole through. Yes, you heard that right. Fly. Before this Carnage mess, Eddie and Venom actually learned they had the ability to do this. It was surprisingly easy. As the two fly away, Spidey, who is seeing this new ability for the first time, yells out in surprise, commenting on how much he hates it. All the while, Venom has the largest grin across his face, clearly enjoying himself. Watching as their enemies fly away, Norman asks why they aren't giving chase, to which the real Carnage responds that there's no need. Besides, there's nowhere they can go with the spreading Carnage infestations. Norman, the crazier of the two, continues complaining and asks, "What happened to running someone down, screaming and laughing and slitting their throats?" I guess that is a typical Carnage day in Norman's mind. However, Cassidy has better ideas. The young wolf runs, and he kills one. The old wolf walks, and he kills them all. And with that amazing line as Carnage walks away, he gives Osborn one more piece of advice. There's more than one spider. None of this registers in Norman's deranged mind, but he follows Carnage anyway. The two clearly have different ways of handling things. Can they manage to work out their master plan without ripping each other's spines out? Jumping back to the heroes, they've crashed into a nearby roof due to Venom's very unsteady flying. Both heavily injured and tired, they lie there, letting the rain hit their face as they decide their next steps. Finally admitting that there's no way they can fight this new, all-powerful Carnage, they decide to change tactics. Get to those codices before him. After all, without the codices, nothing can be set in motion. Splitting their targets in between them, Peter agrees to grab the heroes who had a symbiote throughout the years. This group, or as Peter calls them, the Big Shots, include Captain America, The Thing, Hawkeye, and Wolverine. As for Venom, he'll be going after everyone else, meaning the villains, psychopaths, and other lowlives who have worn the symbiote suit. As Spidey swings away to start his part of things, Eddie gets a call from the Maker, informing him of something rather interesting. You see, he had some free time and decided to hack the FBI's database, gaining access to the list of bodies found at the Nest site. I guess for someone of Reed's genius, this isn't too much of an issue. Here's what he found. Anne was never at the mass grave. With this information, the Maker crafts a hypothesis. and passed her codex down to her son, Dylan, meaning that Eddie's son is a target. To not scare the boy more, Eddie decides to withhold the information until he gets back. However, after taking a look at Dylan and Normie's little side story comic, it doesn't look like the boy is scared in the slightest. He's actually learned he has a strange and unpredictable power to control symbiotes, something he discovered alongside the good son of Venom, Sleeper. Right now, Venom has a job to do. There's a city full of Carnage-infested civilians to clean up and some old villains to track down. City of Carnage. Remember how we mentioned that there might be some discourse between Norman Carnage and Cassidy? Well, let's just say Carnage settled that, grabbing Osborn and reminding him that he's just a little boy playing dress-up, and only because he allows it. But even though he was just embarrassed by the so-called one true Carnage, Norman doesn't back down, telling his fellow psychopath that when the killing spree starts, they're going to have to throw down, especially seeing as how they have their own codices that they can yank from each other's spine. To this, Carnage just laughs, telling Osborn he's long since started on his bloody spree. And just as he says this, we see all that's happening across the now Carnage-infected Marvel Universe. Deadpool is getting ambushed by infested civilians, while also holding multiple burning microwaves for whatever reason. Shriek has already been caught and folded into Carnage's hive. Dylan, Normie, and the Maker are being cornered by a group of experimental symbiotes under Carnage's control. And Mac Gargan Scorpion alongside Miles Morales Spidey are being overrun by Carnage's infested. Just as Carnage said, these two are drowning in a street painted red with mini Carnages. Miles is trying his best to protect Mac, who was actually one of the Venom symbiote's hosts for a while before Eddie took the suit back. Despite the duo's best attempts, they aren't doing well, but that's not stopping Miles, who remains optimistic. After all, he is Spider-Man, and fighting alien monsters is basically his job. With a burst of energy and his bioelectric venom blast, Miles manages to push through the crowd of Carnages, even briefly overpowering them. Unfortunately, strength comes in numbers, and when you're trying to solo an army of healable goo-like alien symbiotes, it's unlikely you'll remain on top for long. Something Miles learns quickly when he gets overtaken by them. Following this, he immediately realizes to never trust a villain. As he calls out to Scorpion for help, the criminal starts to escape, leaving the kid to an army of bloodthirsty monsters. When he turns to leave, Max says he may have been a Venom, but he was never a Spider-Man. As if on cue, the real Venom arrives. Telling him they'll talk later, Eddie picks up Scorpion and tosses him back into the crowd. After all, they've got a fight to win and a Spider-Man to save. Unfortunately for Venom, he just tossed Scorpion into Norman Osborn's grasp, who happened to arrive at that exact moment. Thanking him for that, Norman, to Eddie's horror, digs his tendrils into Mac's back to pull his spine out. Thankfully, Spider-Man manages to free himself from the horde of infested Carnages just in time to strike Norman with an enormous Venom blast. Without wasting a beat, Venom rushes in to rescue the now paralyzed Scorpion, pulling him away from the battlefield. It's only when they've gotten away that the two remember Miles and turn back for him just in time to see him overrun by Carnage-infested cronies. Miles, too, is forcibly bonded with a symbiote. With no other options and Scorpion begging for his help, Eddie is forced to kick the now fully infested kid away and go help Mac. However, when he tries to, he finds Norman Carnage standing over him, ready to squash him with the car he's holding overhead. Using his quick thinking, Eddie manages to connect with Norman for a second when he mentions Normie, and they work on fixing him. Osborn Carnage pauses, seemingly coming to his senses as he asks exactly what is happening with Normie. Using this moment of hesitation to his advantage, the Venom symbiote takes complete control and shoots a tendril right through Osborn's heart. That completely shocks Eddie. After all, the symbiote always listened to him, but as the symbiote tells Eddie, it had to be done. At that moment, Scorpion called out again for help. This time, he reacts, turning to help, but Venom has other ideas, separating from Eddie and taking its own humanoid form. Eddie yells that they need to help Mac, but the symbiote says otherwise. It tells Eddie that they have to finish off Osborn Carnage before his symbiote heals him back up. The two argue about this, but Eddie tells him that he's going to try and save the only person they still can. After letting out a primal scream of frustration, Venom rebonds with Eddie and they rescue Gargan. As they swing away over the sea of red while carrying Scorpion, Eddie and Venom have a bit of an internal back and forth. The Venom symbiote believes that the way things stand, they are going to lose. Seeing as how Carnage is technically his son, Venom gets slightly antsy. This is all his responsibility. Eddie gets back at him, telling his symbiote that he also has a child now, who, mind you, is a target, so they can't really be running headfirst into danger anymore. As the trio approaches their base, the symbiote drops this chilling line on Eddie. I understand, Eddie. You must face the consequences of your spawn as I do. But understand this. if you aren't strong enough to end this, I will find someone who is. The Cavalry Arrives. With that, Eddie enters a safe house expecting to find the Maker. Instead, he finds some better people waiting for him. Captain America, The Thing, Wolverine, Spider-Man, and Bruce Banner. And they're ready to handle whatever situation comes their way. As for the Maker, well, after an incident involving Dylan, Normie, Sleeper, an army of symbiotes, and the present Avengers, let's just say he ran away. Hence, Bruce Banner is here instead. And surprisingly, he confirms that the Maker's device is entirely safe and ready to use, which is why Normie is currently inside the machine having his codex extracted. Handing Scorpion over to Captain America, Eddie gets all caught up with the situation by the other heroes. The Thing confirms that the Maker, or as he calls him, Little Reed, is long gone, but Normie will be out of the machine completely purged in a few hours. The plan is for the heroes to all go in once Normie's given the clear. Thanking Bruce for giving him the rundown, Eddie then learns who exactly this scientist is, the alter ego of the Hulk. Before he can properly understand this, however, Eddie turns to hug his son and meet their new cat. Now hostless, the Sleeper symbiote has taken the form of a cat, and seems to be following Dylan around as his own security, something Eddie thanks the symbiote for. Before the father and son duo can properly talk, though, Spidey interrupts. Normie just got out, so there is work to be done. Eddie immediately suggests that the web slinger and the rest should go in first, but it seems Spidey has other ideas. In typical Parker fashion, he somehow finds a way to blame this entire situation on himself, claiming that he was the first to bring a symbiote to Earth, starting off this entire mess, which is why he'll be the last to remove his codex. Little does Peter know that the symbiotes have had an extensive history on Earth before the Venom symbiote, but as Eddie puts it, he doesn't need to know all that. Besides, having backup when Carnage inevitably storms the place would be nice. And on that jolly note, the codex extracting process begins, leaving Cap, Wolverine, and the Thing unconscious and lying in pods. As Eddie silently watches over them, Spidey approaches for a quick chat, asking him about his son. However, Spidey quickly realizes that this isn't actually Eddie when the real Eddie Brock appears behind him. Instead, it was Carnage using the symbiote to disguise himself. When it's revealed, Carnage monologues to the heroes, telling them that therapists and doctors always tell him he's like this because of his childhood traumas or explicit violence. But they're all wrong. Those things don't make Carnage, since he is those things. As the Madman puts it, he is the guns and the knives and the wickedness of this whole sick world. And with that, he fully suits up and calls in his army of infesteds. In a truly terrifying panel, Carnage stands tall and tells the heroes, "You know my name. Now scream it." In absolute panic, the three conscious heroes split up, each with their own responsibilities for the last stand. Banner confirms that Carnage should not be able to break the containment pods as they are made from some pretty strong materials. Spidey gets ready to fight, and Eddie wants to run to his kid, but Venom has other ideas. Final battle begins. Just as they discussed, Eddie has to take care of his child, but so does Venom. And if Eddie isn't strong enough to finish this, he'll find someone else. And with that, the symbiote leaps away from its host and attaches itself to a screaming Bruce Banner. Watching this transformation happen, Carnage shrugs and shoots a few tendrils through Banner's body. The Madman laughs at the whole situation, asking who the hell that nerd was supposed to be. But he quickly learns, as we know, when Banner goes night-night, the Incredible Hulk comes out to play. Now fully transformed into the Jade Giant, Hulk gives Carnage an oh-so-satisfying punch right in the face, knocking him back a few steps. Genuinely surprised as to what just hit him, Carnage turns to see a Venom-infested Hulk. Now fully bonded, they yell out, "We are Hulk!" And with an incredible Venom smash, the fight between Venom Hulk and Carnage begins. The two smash through walls, the ground, and anything else in their way. But Eddie, who was just abandoned by his symbiote, doesn't seem to care. Instead, he's got to worry about getting his son to safety. Leaving the heroes in their pods and Sleeper wherever he went, Spidey, Normie, Dylan, and Eddie all head to the armory, a solid cement basement filled to the brim with anti-symbiote gear. Yeah, it's about to go down. Trusting the webhead to protect the kids, Eddie suits up in some gear. After making Peter promise that no matter what happens, he'll stay down there and protect the kids, Eddie heads up, ready to take on Carnage. Convincing himself that he can be a hero for just 10 minutes, Eddie rushes into the crowd of symbiote doppelgangers with an electro fist and Captain America's shield. Noting how weird it is to be fighting without his partner in living armor, Eddie realizes just how vulnerable he really is in this situation. Clearly, Spider-Man has been rubbing off on him, since instead of finding another solution, Eddie decides that no matter what happens from here on out, he'll go down swinging, even when going up against a Carnage-infected Miles Morales Spider-Man. Before we get into that, however, let's check in with our big fight between Carnage and Venom Hulk. It seems not much has changed between the powerhouses, with Carnage constantly spewing nonsensical things as Hulk beats the Man-Man to a pulp. Finally, Venom Hulk tells the Dark Symbiote that he talks too damn much, to which Carnage responds, "You know what, Bruce? I think you might be right." To fix this little issue, Carnage decides to connect his brain with Banner's, sharing his thoughts and comments directly with, as I like to call them, Vulk's brain. Guiding the tendrils to the part of the brain that controls the Vulk's emotion, Carnage just turns off their rage, immediately reverting them back to Banner form. Well, it was fun while it lasted. Going back to Eddie, we see that his fight with Miles isn't actually going too badly. In fact, using the gauntlet he stole from the armory, along with Captain America's shield as a conductor, he's almost able to mimic Miles' Venom Blast and free him from his Carnage symbiote. And just in time for the two of them to witness Carnage rip the Venom symbiote right from puny Banner's limp body. Forcibly bonding with Eddie's symbiote, Carnage gains access to all its stored codices. And with this, Eddie finally admits that all hope has been lost. Carnage is going to win. God is coming. Last stand. But giving up isn't something the Earth's mightiest heroes are able to do. No matter the situation, they've got a world to protect, and that's exactly what Cap, Wolverine, and the Thing plan to do. Taking his shield back from Eddie, Captain America leads the heroes into battle against the newly improved Carnage. Eddie watches in awe as the heroes run towards the unstoppable villain, finally understanding something. He isn't alone in this. At that moment, Miles gives the hopeless man one last punch, telling Eddie they need to go and protect the machine, as it still holds the codices of Cap, Wolverine, the Thing, and Hawkeye. Confused as to why the codices haven't been destroyed yet, Eddie ignores that and realizes this is his last chance. Breaking into the crowd of Carnage doppelgangers, he begins to make his way to the machine before the infested can break it down. While he does that, we see Pete and the kids, terrified as they wait in the basement. Spidey's webbed up his knuckles and is ready to take on whoever comes banging through that door. And to his surprise, it's Norman Osborn. Telling the villain to stay right there, Spider-Man prepares for the fight of his life. It's a one-on-one with Carnage Osborn in a tight space with children he swore to protect nearby. This is without a doubt one of the most important fights of the web crawler's career. Taking a look at the big shots, it seems their last pitiful push against the new and improved Carnage was an utter failure that leaves them defeated. It's all on Eddie now to somehow defeat Carnage and stop the arrival of Null. And he has just the tool to do it, having extracted the codices. Immediately, he can hear the voices of the former hosts in his mind, all giving Eddie different instructions and orders before eventually bonding with his own codex and settling. The voices all merge into one as Eddie creates something entirely new but somewhat familiar. As he flies out of the base, chasing after Carnage, in his new symbiote suit, he says his legendary phrase, "We are Venom." Following a brief flashback of Eddie and Cletus' first terrifying time meeting, we jump to the two symbiote hosts beating the living hell out of each other. After eventually smashing through just about every surface, Carnage finally gets the upper hand over Eddie and lets him in on a little secret. With his new hive connectivity, he can see just about everything. He can see through the eyes of his doppelgangers, hear other symbiotes' thoughts, and even share their pain. Continuing his little monologue, Cletus essentially tells Eddie that fighting at this point is useless, and he should just give up his codex so that the two symbiote hosts may rule at Null's feet. Sharing a similar opinion with Vulk, Eddie tells the lunatic to shut up. He just wants his symbiote back and to put Cletus where he belongs, in a grave 6 feet under. Oh, and to add to that, Eddie tells Carnage he might want to check on his doppelgangers one more time, because at the moment, the battle is far from over. In fact, with the arrival of Cloak and multiple other heroes including Dagger, Captain Marvel, Shriek, and Iron Fist, it is really just the beginning. The tables are slowly turning in the anti-hero's favor as Venom tackles a now weakened Carnage. At the same time, Spidey lands the winning punch on Carnage Osborn, knocking him out cold. However, all that fighting took quite a toll on the webhead. Subsequently, the minute he confirmed Dylan and Normie were okay, his body finally let out, dropping to the floor unconscious. Watching all this happen, Carnage laughs and jeers at Eddie as the two are flying, telling him that he's about to lose his little boy. We then see the Carnage symbiote that was bonded with Norman rise and approach Dylan. This, of course, makes Eddie freak out, and he quickly barrels into Cassidy, redirecting his flight and sending him in the direction of Dylan, Normie, and Spider-Man. But before either of them gets there, Dylan manages to save himself, repeating Eddie and Peter's sentiment of hating all symbiotes before once again using his strange powers. He pops the Carnage symbiote like a balloon before passing out, leaving poor Normie as the only one still conscious. Not for long though, because right after he secures Dylan, Carnage comes crashing through the roof, landing on his stomach with Venom right behind him. Trying his best to hold Cletus back, the two begin their final struggle. Seeing as how Dylan, the new key to his entire plan, is right in front of him, Cletus is using all of his power to grab the boy. And eventually, despite Eddie's best attempts, Carnage does just that, reaching his tendrils around the boy. Now holding his son hostage, Carnage gives Eddie an ultimatum, one that could decide the fate of the universe. Either Cletus kills the boy, rips out his codex, and hopes that will be enough to wake up Null, or Eddie can kill Carnage, take back his original symbiote, thus connecting back to the Hive and waking up God. No matter what happens to Carnage, it's a win-win situation for him. Something he must have been planning from the very start. So what's it going to be, Eddie? Let your son die or doom the entire world? From what we've seen so far and the lengths he'd go to for his son, we think the answer is pretty obvious. And apparently, so does Eddie. As he puts it, screw the world. And on that bitter note, Eddie rams a symbiote-crafted sword through Carnage's spine, immediately killing the walking skeleton and bringing his previous symbiote back to its rightful host. As Venom rebonds with Eddie, it questions if he can understand exactly what he just did. With the Hive now complete, Null has finally been awoken and can hear everything. Bursting out of his planetary cage of living symbiotes, the newest and most dangerous foe the Marvel Universe has seen is set free. Riding on his god-killer dragon, it seems he's coming towards Earth to find whoever woke him, or just to wreak havoc. But that'll be a problem for another day. Right now, Eddie's gotta rest, catch up with his symbiote on what the hell to do next, and have a nice long talk with Dylan about how he's actually his father and not his brother. Eddie Brock's life has been flipped upside down once again, and not in a good way at all. He's got a lot to handle and little time to do so before Null eventually catches up to him, thus kicking off the King in Black event. For now, that's all there is to it in absolute carnage. Let us know your thoughts and comments below. Do you want us to continue into the King in Black storyline? This has been Alexandra Macedo, and I'll catch you all in the next video.